Stay back, she warned when Mendenbar leaned forward to get a better view. Mendenbar sat back, watching closely, as Morwen spread the 5 dragon scales out in a line. She set the purple scale at one end and the bright green one at the other. Then she held a bowl over the center of the line and took a deep breath and said, "Wind for clarity, stone for endurance, stream for change, fire for truth, be what you are." As she spoke, she tilted the bowl and poured a continuous line of dark liquid in a long stripe across the middle of the 5 scales. There was a flash of purple light, and the liquid began to glow. The glow spread outward like a fire creeping around the edges of a piece of paper until it reached the rims of the dragon scales. Then it flashed once more and vanished. 5 identical scales lay side by side on the table, all of them bright green. "I thought so," Morwen said with satisfaction. "These scales all came from the same dragon. Someone altered them so they would each look different." "Why do you think someone would do that? And who do you think would do that?" "Oh, good," Mendenbar said with some relief. "How do you know?" "How did you figure it out?" "The scales were the same shape and very nearly the same size," Morwen said. "Different dragons might have scales about the same size if they were the same age, but there's much variation in the shape of the scales, just as with the color." "Really?" Mendenbar said, interested. "I didn't know that." "Not many people do. But look at these. They're all round, with one flat edge. If they'd come from different dragons, I'd expect one to, say, be squared off, another oval, another long and wiggly, and so on." "In that case, it shouldn't be too hard to find the dragon who destroyed the chunk of the forest," Mendenbar said. Morwen looked at him severely over the top of her spectacles. "I'm not sure it was a dragon at all." "Why not?" Mendenbar asked. "Because the scales were changed? But if you didn't want to be blamed, if some dragon wanted to avoid being blamed for burning up a piece of the enchanted forest, he would not have left his scales at this rate." Picking them up would have been a lot easier than changing them. Besides, a healthy dragon doesn't shed this many scales. Unless you think your rogue dragon burned down a lot of trees and then stood around looking at them for a week or 2. "I see." Mendenbar picked up one of the scales and ran his fingertips across it. "It's a good thing you were the one who found these," Morwen went on, waving the dragon scales. "If it had been one of the elves, there would have been trouble for certain." "Why do you say that? Whoever found them would have had to bring them to the castle." "And long before he got there, word would have been all over the forest that a lot of dragons had burned half the woods to powder," Morwen said. "Most elves mean well, but they can't keep a secret, and they have no common sense to speak of. Filthy creatures." "Do you think someone was trying to make trouble between the enchanted in the forest and the dragons, then?" "It's possible," Morwen answered. "If you hadn't come to me, you'd probably have thought that the scales came from different dragons. Plenty of people know about the color variation. I doubt that you'd have figured out about the transformation, though. Only people who are fairly familiar with dragons know about the differences in shapes in their scales. And I don't think anyone in the castle understands dragons very well." "How do you happen to know so much about dragons?" Mendenbar asked, nettled. "Oh, Kazul and I have been friends for a long time," Morwen said. "We trade favors now and then. She lets me have a spare scale when I need one for a spell, and I lend her books from my library and pots and pans that she doesn't want to keep around all the time. In fact, Kazul is the one who convinced me that it would be a good time to move to the enchanted forest." "Kazul?" Mendenbar said, frowning. "That name sounds familiar. Who is she?" "Who's Kazul? We all know who Kazul is, right?" "Why, Kazul's the king of the dragons," Morwen said. "Drink your cider." Automatically, Mendenbar lifted his mug. Then the implications of what Morwen had said sank in, and he choked. Morwen was a good friend of the king of the dragons? No wonder she knew so much about dragon scales. Morwen gave him an ironic look, as if she knew exactly what he was thinking. To give himself time to recover, Mendenbar sipped at his cider. It was cold and sweet and tangy, and it fizzed as it slid across his tongue. He looked at the mug in surprise and then took a longer drink. It was just as tasty the second time. This is very good. Morwen looked almost smug. I make it myself. You can have a bottle and take it back to the castle with you, provided that you take a bottle to Kazul when you go see her about the scales that you found. Wait a minute. What makes you think I'm going to see Kazul? How else are you going to find out who these scales belong to? I may know more about dragons than most people, but I can't tell you whose scales they are just from their color and size. Kazul can. Besides, you should have paid a call last year when the old king died and Kazul got the crown. I sent a note and a coronation present, Mendenbar said. He sounded sulky, even to himself, and he felt as if he were being lectured by his mother, who had died when he was 14. I was gonna visit, but the forest giants decided to come south early, and then some fool magician tried to turn a rock snake into a bird and got a cockatrice, and it's been one thing after another, and you never really found the time, Morwen said. Really, Mendenbar, haven't you learned by now that that's always going to be one thing after another? Busy is no excuse. Everyone is busy. You take those scales and bottle of cider and go talk to Kazul. At the very least, you'll get some good advice, and I expect you'll get some help as well. You look to me as if you could use it. The castle staff is very good, Mendenbar said, and my steward does an excellent job. I'm sure he does, Morwen said, but one good steward isn't enough to run a normal kingdom, much less the enchanted forest. It's perfectly plain just from looking at you that you are wearing yourself out trying to do everything yourself. It is? Morwen gave him a firm little nod. It is, and it's quite unnecessary. All you really need is a wife, Mendenbar muttered, resigned, recognizing the beginning of Willen's familiar complaint. Is someone sensible to talk to? Morwen finished. She looked at him sternly over the tops of her glasses. Preferably someone who knows at least a little about running a kingdom. An exiled prince, for instance, though they don't usually stay long enough to be useful. Someone who'll do more than make lists of things you need to attend to. Mendenbar thought of Willen's endless schedules and could not help smiling. You're probably right. He suppressed a sigh. He didn't have time to spend hunting for a capable advisor. Do you know anybody suitable? Several people, but they're all quite happy where they are right now, Morwen said. Don't worry, this is the enchanted forest. If you start seriously looking for good help, you'll find some. I hope I recognize it when I see it, Mendenbar said. He took another long drink of cider and stared into the mug. You're the most sensible person I've talked to in days. I don't suppose you'd consider moving to the castle. Certainly not, Morwen answered tartly. I've got quite enough to do here. However, I'll have the cats keep an eye for any more burnt-out patches of forest. And if I think of anything that might be important, I'll let you know. Finish your cider and go see Kazul before you talk yourself out of it. I won't talk myself out of it, Mendenbar said, taking another sip of cider. It's a good idea. He picked up the dragon scales and put them back into his pocket. He hoped Kazul would be able to tell him something worthwhile. The enchanted forest was large, but it could disappear in a hurry if someone started punching holes in it. He frowned suddenly. Do dragons eat magic? Not that I know of, Morwen said. Why do you ask? Well, that burnt-out place I told you about, Mendenbar said. There wasn't any magic left in it. It had been sucked dry. I've never seen anything like that. Who do we know who sucks magic? Think about it. I don't think dragons would have done that, Morwen said. She considered for a moment and then rose. Wait here a minute. I want to look something up. She walked over to the back door, the one through which Mendenbar had come in. He watched puzzled as she opened the door and stepped into it, a room full of dark, tall bookcases. Morwen left the door open and disappeared among the shelves. Mendenbar blinked. The windows on either side of the door looked out onto the garden, and the one on the right still had a cat in it. Oh, of course, he thought. It's one of those doors where you can go where you want to. There was a door like that in one of the castle attics, which was convenient for him getting back to the ground floor without actually having to climb down 7 flights of stairs. Unfortunately, you still had to climb up all 7 flights in order to get to the attic in the first place. Morwen reappeared holding a red book with the title, The Patient Dragon, printed on the cover in gold. She closed the library door behind her and sat down at the table again. She flipped rapidly through the book, then slowed and read half a page with great care. I thought so, she said. Dragons don't eat magic. They generate their own, the way unicorns do. You're sure? See for yourself. Morwen held the book out. Austin is very reliable. And the more obscure the fact, the more reliable he tends to be. If he says dragons make their own magic, they do. I'll take your word for it, Mendenbar said, but the more I find out, the less sense any of this makes. Then you haven't found out enough, Morwen said. They talked for a few more minutes while Mendenbar finished his cider. Morwen told him how to find Kazul's cave in the Mountains of Morning, but refused to advise him on what to do when he got there. Finally, she packed him off with 2 bottles of cider, the red book about dragons, and a recommendation not to waste any more time than he had to. Mendenbar headed straight back to the castle. Visiting the king of the dragons was going to take more preparation than simply talking to a sensible witch, and Morwen was right about wasting time. Okay, that is the end of that chapter. So, we have met Morwen again. Mendenbar is now going to go meet Kazul, which means he'll probably also meet Cimarine in the process. And we'll find out if Kazul knows anything about anyone who sucks magic. But I'm pretty sure that we know something about people who suck magic, don't we? So keep thinking about that. Write your predictions below, and I'll read another chapter to you guys later. Bye.